Writers, welcome back to I Will Go Down with Your Ship, where we explore the craft of storytelling from every angle. Today, we're diving into one of my favorite topics. If you know me, I'm sure you know villains, but not just any villains, relatable villains. We're going to talk about why it's important to make your villains relatable and how to create those complex antagonists that readers love to hate or love to love. So if you want to level up your villain game, stick around. So, from Darth Vader to Thanos, some of the most iconic villains in storytelling are also the most relatable. I mean, do you remember Scar? I'm surrounded by idiots. I didn't get that until I was a lot older, but I swear, not my family, of course, just, general population stuff. Anyway, they're not just evil for the sake of being evil, although some are. They have motivations, fears, and even vulnerabilities that make them feel real. But why is it so important to create villains that readers can relate to? Well, the answer is simple. A relatable villain makes your story more engaging. When readers can understand and even empathize with your antagonist, they become more invested in the conflict and the outcome of your story. It adds depth to your narrative and makes the stakes feel higher. So let's break down how to craft a villain that's not just memorable, but relatable. Tip number one, give your villain a strong motivation. Every great villain has a reason for what they do, and it's not just because they're evil. What does your villain want and why do they want it? This motivation should be something that your readers can understand, even if they don't agree with it. Take Magneto from X-Men, for example. His actions are driven by his traumatic experiences during the Holocaust and his desire to protect mutants from suffering the same fate. Or consider Killmonger from Black Panther, whose motivations stem from a desire to avenge his father and uplift oppressed people around the world. These motivations are rooted in real, relatable emotions like fear, anger, and a sense of justice. When crafting a villain, ask yourself, what is their ultimate goal? What drives them to make the choices they do? The more you can ground their actions in a motivation that makes sense, the more relatable they'll be. Tip number two, show their vulnerability. Even the most fearsome villains have weaknesses or moments of doubt. And if you're writing a dark romance and the villain is the love interest, then your weakness is your heroine. Just FYI. These vulnerabilities can make them more human and give readers a glimpse into their psyche. A villain who is invulnerable can come across as one dimensional, but a villain who has a weakness feels way more real. Consider Voldemort from Harry Potter. Despite his immense power, he's terrified of death, which drives many of his actions. Or Gollum from Lord of the Rings, whose tragic past and obsession with the One Ring reveal a deeply conflicted character. These vulnerabilities add layers to the villain, making them more than just a flat bad guy. Think about what your villain fears or what weaknesses they have. Maybe it's a physical limitation, a traumatic past, or even a deep seated insecurity. By showing these vulnerabilities, you create a character that readers can connect with on a deeper level. Tip number three, make their actions understandable, even if they're not justifiable. Your villain's decision should make sense within the context of their motivation and backstory. Readers should be able to follow their logic, even if they don't agree with it. Think about Walter White from Breaking Bad. His descent into crime starts with a desire to provide for his family after his terminal cancer diagnosis. While his actions become increasingly immoral, the initial motivation is something many people can relate to. Similarly, Michael Corleone in The Godfather is driven by a sense of family loyalty and a desire to protect his loved ones, even if he makes morally questionable choices. When your villain's actions are rooted in a clear, understandable logic, it makes their character more compelling. Readers don't have to agree with them, and maybe they shouldn't, but they should be able to see and understand where your villain is coming from. Tip number four, give them a sympathetic backstory. A well crafted backstory can provide context for your villain's actions and make them more relatable. What experience shaped them into who they are? Were they wronged in the past, or did they face hardships that pushed them down a darker path? Severus Snape from Harry Potter is a prime example of this. His unrequited love for Lily Potter and the pain of his past explain much of his behavior throughout the series, or even Magneto, who we've already addressed before. His experience as a Holocaust survivor, which it drives him to his militant approach to mutant rights. These backstories don't excuse their actions, but they do help us understand who these villains are. And I would argue that Snape is not necessary. He's not a villain. Crafting a sympathetic backstory doesn't mean your villain has to be pitiable, but it should give readers a glimpse into the events that shape them. This adds complexity and makes your villain feel like a real person rather than a cardboard cutout. Tip number 5, show their humanity. Even the darkest villains have moments of humanity, whether it's a small act of kindness, a moment of regret, or a connection to someone or something that they care about. These moments can be powerful in making your villain relatable. Darth Vader's redemption at the end of Star Wars shows that even someone who has committed terrible acts can still have a spark of humanity. Hannibal Lecter, despite being a cannibalistic serial killer, forms a complex and even almost protective relationship with Clarice Starling, revealing a different side to his character altogether. These moments don't erase their evil deeds, but they add depth and make them more than just the bad guy. Your villain's humanity doesn't have to be overt, but showing glimpses of it can make them more relatable and nuanced. It reminds readers that this character, despite everything, is still human, or at least has human traits. And finally, our last tip, tip number 6, avoid one dimensional evil. A villain who is evil just for the sake of being evil is boring and unrealistic. Real people, and therefore the best fictional villains, are way more complicated than that. Compare a one dimensional villain who's just bad with a more complex character like the Joker from The Dark Knight. The Joker's actions are horrifying. Why am I smiling when I'm talking about the Joker like this? I don't know. It's horrifying. Does horrifying things, but they're driven by this chaotic philosophy that challenges society's norms. He's not just evil, he's an agent of chaos with a twisted worldview, which makes him fascinating. Avoid the trap of making your villain evil just because it's convenient for the plot. Dig deeper into their motivations, their fears, their worldview. The more layers you can add, the more engaging your villain will be. So let's recap really quick. To create a relatable villain, give them a strong motivation, show their vulnerability, make their actions understandable, not justifiable, provide a sympathetic backstory, show their humanity, and avoid one dimensional evil. By following these tips, you'll craft villains that not only challenge your heroes, but also resonate with your readers. And who knows, if they're anything like me, they'll probably fall in love with them. Remember, a great villain isn't just an obstacle for your hero. They're a character in their own right, with their own story to tell. They are the hero of their story. And when you make them relatable, you create a richer, more compelling narrative that stays with readers long after they've turned the page. So that's it for today's video. If you found these tips helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more writing advice. And let me know in the comments, who's your favorite villain and why is it Hades from Disney's Hercules? I love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and happy writing. Bye.